Michael Jordan flu game today for your boy. This voice does not deceive you. I am sicker than a dog. This Thursday morning, November 13th, the SpringBlake studio has been decimated by the flu. Took a little trip down to the Electric Daisy Carnival in Orlando this past weekend. Danced my ass off for 3 straight days with a crowd of 300,000 people. No surprise, I come home sicker than shit, but as always, we march. Welcome into the SpringBlake College Football Show. As I mentioned, today is Thursday, November 13th, on the precipice of Week 12 of the college football season. This is your favorite ball knower's favorite ball knowing show. On today's show, we're going to do a little bit of a scaled back episode because, as I mentioned, flu game. I sound like shit. I feel like shit. Still got to go to work because that's just my life. So we're going to scale it back a little bit. We are going to discuss the latest college football playoff rankings, just some updates, tidbits, things on that. I know we're a couple days removed, but I do want to get some thoughts out there on that. We will break down the 2 biggest games of the college football slate. That is going to be Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Oklahoma, and as always, we'll try to have a little bit of fun while we're doing it. Before we get to all of that, I always have to mention at the start of this show, if this is your first time here, first of all, thank you. Sorry that you get me at a half-assed effort here, but I'm going to try my best. If you are watching on YouTube, if you found us over there, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with a friend, interact however you possibly can. If you are listening Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, 5-star review, subscribe to the channels there. Head over to TikTok at SpringBlakeCFB, where you can find my social page there for stuff that is this show, stuff that goes beyond the show. You'll see a few videos from EDC this past weekend. Any support that you guys give me, I try to give back in tenfold worth of content. This week, not so much. We missed Tuesday because, again, sicker than a dog. I'm starting to feel a little bit better, but I just had to get something out this week. Thank you guys for your support. We're trucking along here through the college football season, and there's no shortage of it slowing down because, unlike many years, we've got the expanded playoffs. I think that I heard this correctly. Like, this is the midway point. This week is still the midway point between the week 0 of the college football season and the national championship. So even though we're in week 12, even though the regular season is coming to an end, we're still very much in the thick of the college football season in totality. We are also going to have the craziest coaching carousel of all time. Transfer portal, new hires, all that stuff. It's going to be chaos. So we're not going anywhere just because the season's coming to an end. So please hitch your wagon to this show. Support it where you can. We are going to keep this thing rolling as long as humanly possible. Before we get into the show, I do want to say one thing. Look, this show is a college football show, but it's also my college football show. So sometimes we're not going to talk college football. I want to talk about EDC Orlando for a second before we get into the show itself, because what a crazy experience that place is. I've mentioned a few times on this show, my second hobby outside of football the last few years has becoming a big EDM fan. Thanks to my better half. She had, a little bit more experience growing up with that music and has kind of brought me into it. I've kind of taken that and ran with it the last few years. But EDM's been a big, interest of my life outside of football. I've done, a few smaller festivals, some standalone concerts, gone to Bonnaroo a couple of times. You can see the shirt I'm wearing today. EDC Orlando. Obviously, on a much larger scale than anything I've done before, is such a different experience. The sound production, lighting, stages, the overall experience is just at a whole other level, something that is totally worth checking out. But let me say this. I am so glad I got that experience out of my way, especially before I got any older. I'm still just 28. I got a whole lot of life left, but I could not imagine going back again any later in my life. We are now 4 days removed from the event. Cavs still on fire, back a jumbled mess. As you can hear, sicker than a dog. I have been ruined since coming back. They humbled me so much. I got stuffed in a locker, turned me into a geriatric. I left that being like, ooh, am I onked now? Have I lost a step? Where is this gone? Now that being said, did I do a whole lot to take care of myself? Not really. Probably could have done better than that. Maybe some vitamin C packets, all that sort of stuff to keep you going. I did see plenty of older people there. There were people like into their 70s that I saw there. Hats off to them. Unlike anything else I've experienced, the last few years, EDC was definitely a one-time thing for me. I think I'd just combust trying to go to that at any bit older than I am right now. Shout out to them. I had a greater time, a greater time than I could have imagined. It was a super fun event. Had a whole lot of fun with Jess. Hell of a weekend. Definitely do not see myself doing that again, though. I cannot believe how I feel 4 days removed from that. My body is in absolute shambles, but I don't know why I wanted to say all that. This is a college football show, except for when it's not. So let's rein things in. Get back to this beautiful sport, because the playoff committee released its second rankings of the the second rankings of the 2025 season. And again, don't really have that much to gripe with, which is a sentiment of what I said last week. The top five remain the same: Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M, Alabama, Georgia. Texas Tech bumped up a couple of spots to 6. Ole Miss bumped down because of that. Oregon at 8, Notre Dame at 9. Texas moved up a spot and got into the at-large field. Miami is technically in as the 11th seed, even though they're ranked 15th. We'll talk about that in just a second. And then USF got that G5 spot as the highest ranked one. They did climb into the top 25 for the first time, which is something we didn't see last week. But they get that 12th spot to being ranked, despite being ranked 24th. First four out: Oklahoma, BYU, who dropped down 5 after that loss to Texas Tech, Utah at 13, Vandy at 14. And I'll just rattle this off after that: Georgia Tech, USC, Michigan, Virginia down 5, Louisville down 5 after the 2 really bad losses in the ACC last week, Iowa, Pitt, Tennessee, and then Cincinnati jumped into the poll for the first time. So overall, this is 2 weeks in a row now of the committee doing a really nice job putting itself in a position to let the games play out before doing anything drastic or crazy and then having to kind of overhaul the list or stay committed to the sediment that they put out from the start. Like, they've just done a really nice job. Last year, the committee went bold at the beginning and then had to hold itself to that framework throughout the rest of the way. But that isn't the same case this time around. Last week, BYU, Texas Tech, neck and neck. I think they were, 7 and 8, somewhere in that range, knowing that both were going to play on a football field just a few days later, and that result would allow them to adjust however it fared. Texas Tech ends up dominating that game. They jump up 2 spots, and BYU, really bad performance. They drop down 5 and appear to need a lot to happen to get an at-large bid, but also probably need to win the Big 12 in order to guarantee themselves a spot in the conference. We also saw that, Miami is now the highest rated team or highest ranked team in the ACC, something we all know to be true. Like, we're sitting here saying that Miami is the best team in the conference, and so they're the highest ranked team because of it. But we also know that their odds of making the conference title game are slim to none because of how they've lost their games. So that's why they're just as high as 15 in the rankings, and that's why teams like Georgia Tech, UVA, Louisville, Pitt are a little bit lower, but will end up grabbing the 11th seed, that being whoever the conference championship is, when it plays out. So they're not putting 1 or 2 loss ACC teams in the top 12 because they know that conference is a diminished group overall. So let's just bump them down into the tier they deserve to be in, so that way the winner, they climb into that 11th seed if it plays out that way. And there's no need to feel like we have to put in an SMU like they did last year because they were ranked high at the beginning of the College Football Playoff Committee polls or rankings. So, they just have done a really nice job giving themselves flexibility throughout the rest of this process, which I really appreciate. They're allowing, statistics and eyeballs to have equal level of importance, and then understanding that some of these games are going to play out and allow them to make adjustments when they find them necessary. The one thing that I say, my biggest gripe 2 weeks in a row, I personally would put Texas A&M in over Indiana, above them. I guess not in. I'd say Texas A&M is 2, Indiana's 3. That's not a gripe on Indiana, and it's something very minuscule, so it doesn't really mean a whole lot to me. But I just think that how Texas A&M has handled business down the stretch and the team that they've developed into. Like, yes, they haven't played Alabama, they haven't played Georgia, they haven't played Ole Miss, they haven't played the top tier of the SEC, but the way that they've handled competitive teams in the conference, to me, has been really impressive and deserving of bumping them up a spot. I thought they might have gone to 2 after how Indiana, struggled with Penn State. They struggled against Iowa. They did beat Oregon, but I just feel like A&M has done enough to be a top 2 seed. Again, something that doesn't matter a ton, but just if I had to pick out where's my gripe in the list? That's the one thing that stood out to me. Couple of smaller notes before we get to our couple of game previews. Everyone keeps talking about the doomsday scenario within the ACC, and as a JMU grad, I'm all here for it. I would love to get 2 G5 conference champions in because that gives the Dukes higher odds of making the college football playoffs. And with that, the doomsday scenario, if you don't know, if Duke gets into the ACC title game, they win the ACC title, they'd be a 4-loss team that's a conference champion. 4-loss ACC Duke with losses to UConn and a few other out-of-conference games probably plays into a little bit easier for a 2-loss USF American Conference champion to get in and a 1-loss JMU to have a better resume than Duke. So that's what the doomsday scenario is if you're not aware with it. Now, personally, I don't think it's going to play out that way. It would be hilarious. It'd be a funny collapse for a conference that we have said all year does not resemble a team that probably deserves more than one to be in, and that one is Miami, and Miami is probably not going to be in. So it would be funny for it to happen that way. I don't think it's going to happen necessarily because there's a lot of we need this result and that result and that result and that result. You got to get Duke into the conference title game and then get them to win it. I don't think that's that likely, but is something that is a hot topic, so I did want to at least bring it up. Staying in the ACC, I did think there was a positive correction on Miami's ranking overall. They bumped up 3 spots from 18 to 15. I thought they were a little too low last week. Miami is one of the best rosters in college football. They had a few really nice wins to start off the year. They've been falling apart as of late. They had a pretty easy win over Syracuse this past weekend. Miami deserves to be in that tier of the Vandies and these other teams that are just vying for a little bit of luck to get in an at-large bid. They obviously have to take care of business the rest of the way, but they're one of the best teams in college football. Yes, they lost a couple of really bad games because of poor quarterback play, and that's something that should be held against them, but I like that there was at least the correction to say, hey, no, they deserve to be in this first 4 out sort of tier in the playoff conversation. Vanderbilt has a really interesting opportunity to throw a wrench in this entire thing and make for a very chaotic, destructive type conversation. So if Vandy wins out, and they've got 2 games remaining against what I believe is Kentucky and then Tennessee. So, no slouches. Kentucky looked good against Florida last week. Tennessee has a really high-powered offense, but say that Vandy runs the table. They finish 10-2, and then Texas splits its games against Georgia and A&M down the stretch, and they finish at 9-3. A 10-2 team should be in no matter what, right? But is it at the expense of leaving out the team that beat you thoroughly? And then that word there, thoroughly, is very important. How much context is the committee going to allow in those conversations? Because you might say, hey, Texas only beat Vanderbilt by 3 points. That's not thoroughly. Sure, they were up 24 points in the fourth quarter, and they looked dominant through the first 45 minutes. The game was over, and then Vandy started to kind of just march down and make things interesting. Is that context going to be a positive for Texas in that conversation? Or will the committee just say, no, that's a 3-point win. That doesn't really matter. You only beat them by a few, and you have 1 extra loss. So it's going to be interesting if you keep Texas out when 2 of its losses are 1-possession games. Let's say they lose to Georgia by 3 points, and then they go and beat Texas A&M. Would you keep Texas out when 2 of its losses would be 1-possession outcomes to 2 of the top 5 seeds in the playoffs in favor of a team that you beat? Vandy is one linchpin here in the conversation where they may go lose to Tennessee at the end of the year, and we're like, thank God we don't have to have that conversation. But if Vanderbilt is 10-2, and 10-2 is usually, especially in the SEC, a guarantee that you're in the dance, how will that fare when a team that beat you thoroughly was thoroughly, if we're using context, we're not just looking at box scores, it was a thorough beating, Texas over Vandy. How will that conversation shake out? That's going to be a really interesting thing to monitor as the year goes on. And especially if say Texas goes and beats Georgia and they beat A&M, then obviously the 10-2 matters with the head-to-head result. But if they split and Vandy wins out, I'm really curious to see what the committee does there. God, I didn't really want to spend this much time on it. I thought Texas Tech jumping up to 6 was interesting, not because they didn't deserve to move up, but because it came at the expense of bumping a team like Ole Miss down. I think what they're trying to do is open up a path for the Big 12 champ to get a top 4 seed and thus get a bye. I think they probably want to try and reward conference champions that, maybe just have one loss or have looked like a top 10 team. Like the ACC, you don't want to award them a bye because that conference is dog water. But a team like Texas Tech, where they lose one game when they had their backup quarterback in, they lose it by one possession, that probably, doesn't hang as big of a negative as some of the teams in the ACC. So if Texas Tech wins the Big 12, I think they're trying to push them closer to a top 4 seed. I did think it was interesting to bump them over Ole Miss because I do think that Ole Miss didn't necessarily do anything to deserve moving down, but I think the big picture of it is like, hey, let's just start inching Texas Tech up, so if they win the Big 12 title and they have one loss on the regular season, we can just crown them and reward them a bye and kind of just be a little bit more favorable to the Power 4 conferences as a whole. Oklahoma is in a must-win position this weekend, and that's even with me considering that I think 9-3 SEC teams are in play at the at-large conversation. The reason that I say that it's a must-win versus Alabama, even though they could go on and be a 9-3 SEC team, is that I don't think that being 9-3 with wins over Michigan, Auburn, South Carolina, Tennessee, Missouri, and LSU say enough for your resume. If all 3 of your losses have come at the hands of other playoff teams and are by an average of 12.5 points, something that it is currently, with their 2 losses being to Texas and Ole Miss, it's by an average of 12.5 points. Say that you lose to Alabama by double digits and you don't have any other wins over other playoff teams, that's just not compelling enough of an argument. Texas might have that situation where they're 9-3, and sure, they lost 3 games, but unlike Oklahoma, they lost to Ohio State by 7. Florida was a 1-possession game. Maybe the loss to Georgia or A&M is also another close one. And they have wins over teams that are in the mix. They have the head-to-head over Oklahoma. They did beat Vanderbilt. Like, they do have enough to warrant themselves more of the opportunity to create a claim for an at-large bid. I don't think Oklahoma has that. Now, obviously, Oklahoma can still run the table. They could still be a 2-loss team. Totally different story. But running the table starts at Bryant-Denny Stadium this weekend, so they better have their ducks in a row so that they don't have to be stuck in that unfortunate position. And then the last thing, this is what I said at the beginning, like the results will start to play itself out. We'll get our answers from USC because they've got games against Iowa, they've got a game against Oregon. We'll figure out if they're going to be able to be a 10-2 team because 10-2 does seem to guarantee you a spot in the playoffs. Michigan, they'll have the game against Ohio State. Crazy thing with Michigan that I don't think people have realized enough, not only if Michigan goes and beats Ohio State, do they do it for another year in a row and they're a 2-loss team that in the Big Ten that would guarantee them a spot. If Michigan beats Ohio State and they don't lose to Northwestern, they get to 10-2 on the season, they're playing for the Big Ten title against Indiana because they have the head-to-head over Ohio State. So that is going to be really interesting to watch as the year goes on. Now, I obviously believe that Ohio State is a better team, but I've thought they've been a better team last year and they lost. So very interesting point with Michigan. The jumbled mess in the ACC will play itself out just because the lone conference champ will get in. All of the major questions will start to play out in results, which is what I really like. And again, just one more time, the committee has done a really nice job this year of not putting its foot in its mouth early on and then having to commit to some poor decisions that they made a month ago, a month later. So those are my thoughts on the college football playoffs. I am going to take a water break because my voice is dying here. We are just doing 2 previews this week, so we'll talk Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma, and then send you all on your way, and I am going to go pick up some medicine.
Balake. Where is Balake at?
So it's a big weekend in the SEC, as it always is. Really interesting thing that, I was going through all the games of the week and realizing it's revenge week for a lot of teams in the SEC. For Texas, a team we'll talk about in a second, they're going to Georgia. They lost to Georgia twice last year. Alabama is playing Oklahoma. Oklahoma beat them, blew them out. I think it was 24-3 or something. They held Alabama to 3 points. That result, the third loss of the season for Alabama, kept them out of the playoffs. Texas A&M hosts South Carolina. When Texas A&M went to South Carolina last year, that was the first loss that sent them on their downhill spiral, losing 3 out of their final 4 games, keeping them out of the college football playoffs. And then you have Ole Miss playing Florida. And last year when Florida beat Ole Miss, that kept Ole Miss out of the playoffs. So it's a huge revenge spot for a lot of teams. Very curious to see who can get the revenge, who, loses for a second time in a row, and how some of these games may impact the college football playoffs. But we're starting Texas at Georgia. The Bulldogs are 5.5 points at home. Texas obviously would love to run the table here, cement their case in the college football playoffs as just a 2-loss team. At the very least, needs to split these outcomes between the Georgia game and the Texas A&M game to be under consideration for a final at-large bid. And Georgia's sitting pretty, right now in the playoff conversation. Obviously, they don't want to lose another game on the regular season. They're really starting to round into form as the year goes on. Also need the win to keep their SEC title games, title odds within reach. So massive game here. The Bulldogs are coming off what feels like their most complete game of the season against Mississippi State. They win that one 41-21. Is that another turning point for this group? Or is it just what happens when you go up against Mississippi State? We'll find out. So Georgia swept the series 2-0 last year, and while all we've done is talk about how worse off Texas is this year, specifically on offense, it's important to not acknowledge that Georgia has also fallen off in some major areas, specifically up front defensively. And this is something that we've talked about all year, but it's huge for this game against the Texas Longhorns. In Georgia's 2 games against Texas last year, they sacked Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning, a total of 13 times in those 2 games. This season, through 9 games, Georgia only has 11 sacks on the year. So they sacked Texas more in 2 games than they've been able to accomplish in 9 this season. That pass rush has been non-existent for the Bulldogs this year. That number is tied for 122nd in college football. And while Arch has taken a beating at different points this season, he's had a few 5-sack games pop up. Texas has allowed 18 overall on the year. They gave up 0 to Vandy last week and have played their best against their toughest opponents on the schedule. Just 2 sacks allowed to the defensive fronts of Ohio State at the beginning of the year, Oklahoma in the Red River Shootout. So when they have gone up against their toughest foes, the offensive line, the pass protection has played its best games. And that, to me, is the matchup that's going to eventually swing the outcome of this game. If Georgia can find its pass rush in a similar way to that, Florida, Mississippi State had, then we will see how ineffective this offense can look at times. Like, the offense is lost when they cannot keep Arch upright. And if Georgia is somehow able to turn the corner and find that all of a sudden, then obviously Texas, it will not be able to do much against this Georgia defense. But if the Bulldogs can't simulate pressure, bring Arch to the ground, then this offense has a chance to hum just like it has against Vandy, Oklahoma. Like this offense is getting better performances, especially out of Arch Manning. If Arch Manning is being kept upright, he's got a chance to pepper the ball around this Georgia secondary. The kid has been letting it rip the last few weeks. 68% completion rate, 674 passing yards, 7 total touchdowns to just 1 interception. Texas has also found its explosive passing game since the start of October, connecting on 16 of such plays. And while the Georgia defense has been phenomenal at stopping the run, that limited pass rush has opened them up to a pass defense that ranks in the low 50s of college football. So, it's great on first, second down, but in those third and long situations, they're not getting to the quarterback, and quarterbacks are taking advantage of what is maybe not the best Georgia secondary we've seen over the last few years. Now, these things for Texas, like Arch's arm, has some more pop to it. The playmakers are starting to do more with the ball once it's in their hands. And because of that, Sark seems to have more trust in this group and is dipping into his bag a little bit more as the year goes on. And these are things that we've been talking about since week 1. Like, we came out of that Ohio State game being like, Arch's arm looks weak. What was the play calling from Sark? Where are the playmakers doing stuff after the catch? We've started to see a little bit more of that, and it gives you more faith that Texas is finding things and figuring out what they want to be on offense. Again, kind of like what I said with Georgia looking, its best against Mississippi State. Is that what is actually happening here for Texas, or is that just playing Mississippi State and Vanderbilt? And again, Vanderbilt isn't a mess, and Mississippi State is better than they were a year ago, but going up against Georgia is a little bit different of a tune. To flip things over to the Georgia offense, I have been so impressed with Gunnar Stockton as he's developed throughout the course of the season. And this has been something now, a trend with Georgia quarterbacks. Like, as the year goes on, it might not be pretty weeks 1 and weeks 2 as they're tuning things up in their non-conference. When they are humming by the end of the season, it looks phenomenal. In Stockton's last 4 games, he's completing 70% of his passes, averaging 250 yards a game, 11 total touchdowns to just 1 interception. Georgia is starting to run the piss out of the ball again, dominate the time of possession. They're good on third downs. All the stuff that you expect to get out of a Georgia offense, they've slowly been rounding into form over the last month and a half of play. That being said, facing this Texas defense is going to be a little bit different than facing Mississippi State, Florida, Kentucky, Texas. The one thing that they've had right from the start of the season has been its defense. The Longhorns have the second best run defense in the nation, are tied for first in sacks per game, and also have a top 25 third down defense, top 10 turnover margin. This defense has been carrying him for a while now, and as the offense has started to come alive a little bit, you're getting what you thought you'd get out of Texas at the beginning parts of the season. So, one thing that I thought was interesting about Georgia is they haven't really faced a defense like Texas since that Auburn game. And it was really interesting in the first half of that game. And that swung on the overturned fumble. But Auburn was really just, keeping pace, dominating time of possession on Georgia's defense. And Auburn's defense is a pretty strong group under DJ Durkin, good pass rush, talented players in the front 7. And Georgia did look a little bit lost in the first half of that game until there was a whole momentum flipped on that overturned touchdown. I'm very curious to see how the Georgia offensive line is going to handle Texas's front 7, because I don't think they've necessarily been faced against a group that is quite like that. Like, they played Alabama. Alabama recently has been getting better play out of its front 7. It hasn't been dominant. Auburn, as I mentioned, did a nice job at certain points, but there really hasn't been a group that I just think like, wow, Georgia's offensive line is going to be outmatched. This might be one of those games. So I'm very curious to see, they've done well at keeping the quarterback upright. They've done well at running the football. Will that change in this game? And all of a sudden, maybe Gunnar isn't allowed to be as effective or efficient because he has to do more with his arm. So, both of these teams have shown us they can win games by putting up 30 plus. They can win ugly slugfests. I think both might want to play very different styles of games in this one. I think that Georgia will have enough faith in its ground game to chew clock, use the home field advantage to their benefit, win a grimy, low-scoring type of game. And on the other side, I think that Texas has enough faith in its defense to where the Longhorns are going to want to jump out to that early lead, kind of like how Auburn took it to Georgia early in the first half. I think Texas wants to do that to the Bulldogs defense because they know that the Texas front 7 can do enough to really make things messy for Georgia's offense if they need to respond. I think that whoever dictates the style or tempo of this game is going to be the one that pulls out the victory. And I'll be honest, I do think that the home field advantage at night makes for an easier path for the Bulldogs. And here are some numbers that really stand out. Kirby Smart has won 13 straight SEC finales. This Saturday is the Bulldogs' final conference game. Meanwhile, Texas has been just 10-14 against the spread in games versus ranked opponents under Steve Sarkisian. I'm going to flip something. When I was writing out this preview, I was going to split the middle. I was going to say, okay, I think that Georgia's going to pull out the victory, but it'll be a 3-point game. So I take Georgia to win, Texas to cover. I really think that the Texas defense might throw Georgia a real curveball that they haven't faced in quite some time. And if that's the case, and Texas can use its offense to spring out to an early lead, I think that Texas could put itself in a position much like Alabama did in the first half, where it's like, hey, man, you got a big enough lead. You just have to really, hold on for dear life in the second half, because Georgia's going to have some fight. They're going to make a comeback. Can you hold them off? I'm going to flip. I'm going to take Texas to win this football game. I'm going to go Texas, final score 24-10. Up until this point, I was going to go Georgia and a Texas cover, low-scoring Georgia win. But I really think that Texas's defense, if they can get enough support from the Texas offense, a group that has been humming as of late, a group that's going to be fully healthy when they head into this game, I think that's going to make the difference in the outcome of this game. So give me the Longhorns to win 24-20 and vault themselves not just into the 10 seed of the playoffs, but no, they're in that mix in the 6, 7, 8 range, and all they have to do is take care of Texas A&M or play them close to solidify a spot in the college football playoffs. So that's my thoughts on that game. Let's take one more break. We'll preview Oklahoma, Alabama, and then get on out of here.
My name's Blake.
All right, so let's finish up the show. One final game preview. Oklahoma, another team in a must-win spot, another team chasing one of those final playoff positions, is heading to Tuscaloosa to take on Kalen DeBoer's Alabama Crimson Tide. This line also at 5.5 right now in favor of the home team. Over-under is set at 46.5. Everyone is starting this game preview with the same conversation. They're talking about the massive advantage that Oklahoma's run defense has against Alabama's run offense. It's the biggest thing that will swing the outcome of this game. We're going to start by talking about that positional matchup as well, but not to the same angle that most people are approaching it. So yes, the Crimson Tide have a piss-poor ground game. It's one of the worst in college football. Jam Miller has not really turned into the feature back that they might want him to. He's good for his 3 yards a carry, maybe the occasional explosive, but all in all, it's been a very underwhelming group, maybe the weakest link for this Alabama offense. And at the same time, the Sooners do have a top 5 ground game in the country. They're one of the best front sevens. They're loaded up front. They've done a great job eliminating the impact of a lot of ground games they've seen so far this season. It will be an important matchup. However, I don't believe it's going to be the deciding factor in this game, because Alabama isn't like your traditional old-style football team where it's like, we're just going to ram it between the tackles 15 to 18 times a game. We don't care if we average 2 yards a carry. We're just going to commit to just jamming the football between the tackles. Because if they did that, then yeah, I would say that Oklahoma has a pretty sizable advantage and will be able to limit this Alabama offense. But what the Crimson Tide do instead of doing that is they'll jam it in between the tackles occasionally. But they'll use end-arounds, motion, RPOs, wide receiver runs, screen plays. They use so many other types of short yardage plays to keep the defense honest that almost facilitate what a ground game would give you. So if Alabama's always going outside of the box to get those short yardage plays, I don't think that Oklahoma's run game is going to have that much of an impact. It almost might be nullified because they won't be able to rely on this Alabama offense to just go between the tackles. If they're spreading it out and they're doing quick plays to the outside, all of a sudden that puts more stress on the back end of the defense. And the back end of Oklahoma's defense has been its weakness. They've allowed 15 explosive passing plays since the month of October. They've been a bottom 15 group over the last 3 games, that being to, I believe, South Carolina had a bad day against them, but Ole Miss and Tennessee just torched them through the air. Meanwhile, Alabama has had one of the most explosive passing games all season, 39 plays of 20-plus yards. Their 291 yards per game are a top 15 metric in the sport, and their 25-to-1 touchdown-to-interception ratio is second to just UConn, which, quick aside, that's hilarious. UConn right now, 27 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Like, what the hell is going on up there? Massive win for the Huskies over Duke this past weekend. But to bring this back to this game, I just don't see Oklahoma's strength being able to be a strength because because Alabama is going to be able to neutralize that by just getting the ball quick to the outside and using all of these trick plays and motion and RPOs that really just facilitate that ground game, as I keep mentioning. On the flip side, Alabama's defense continues to not be dominant, and we're saying the same thing about Alabama every week, so I don't want to bore you guys to death here. All they do is they make the big plays when the big plays are required. Like, yes, they beat the LSU, they covered the spread, held them to 9 points, but LSU was still kind of marching at certain points. Garrett Nussmeier had a pretty nice completion rate in that game. What they do is they just make the biggest plays when possible. They stand up in the red zone. They hold them to field goals instead of touchdowns. And when it comes to turnovers, they force them. They make the big play, and that swings the outcome of these games. The one weakness, the one thing that still concerns me when it's all said and done about Alabama's defense is mobile quarterbacks. Diego Pavia. This was the same issue last year when they went up against guys like Jackson Arnold. Mobile quarterbacks have had, I think, all season, when they face mobile quarterbacks, they've had at least 65 rush yards when you negate sacks. So for John Mateer, a guy that you've started to see get a little bit more comfortable as he returns from his hand surgery in the middle of the season, you're starting to see him utilized in the ground game a lot more. I think they were patient with him early on. You didn't see a ton of it against Texas and maybe the week or two after. But in these desperation spots, they're putting the ball in their best players' hands and saying, whatever you can do, please help us out. Xavier Robinson has been fantastic at tailback the last month. He has provided a much-needed balance to this offense. And when you have that, it just opens up things for the receivers. It lets Mateer to be Mateer, the athlete, the thrower. And all in all, I think you're able to get a solid outing from the Oklahoma offense against what I do think is a talented defense, but one that has its weaknesses. So that's me kind of just touching on every little thing here. To talk about the game and land the plane on it, last time these two teams faced, it was all Oklahoma. Alabama was held to a season low 3 points and 234 yards despite being 14-point favorites in this game. It was the first time Alabama didn't score a touchdown since 2011, and this loss kept them out of the college football playoffs. It was their third loss of the season, the one glaring, really bad loss. I guess not the only one, but it was a bad one. And since then, Alabama has turned itself into a much more polished and effective offense. The defense has gotten stronger as well. Alabama has been one of the more improved teams we've seen since last season. And Oklahoma has made improvements as well. Swapping in, Mateer and Arbuckle for what they had last year on offense has made all the difference. Xavier Robinson coming along in the ground game. These are two teams that now when they face off in 2025, you're like, man, we've got some offensive fireworks here. I do think that Oklahoma will be able to put up points on the Crimson Tide. But I just wonder if when things get to the red zone and they aren't able to utilize their athletes as much and they have to get a little bit more mean and physical, I wonder if they'll be able to pop off and get touchdowns or if they'll have to settle for field goals. I think it'll be the latter, and I think Alabama's offense, I am not too worried about the ground game because of the way they'll facilitate short yardage opportunities. I think their explosive passing game will be there. That was the thing with that LSU game. They were just inches away from connecting on 3 or 4 plays that would have made that score even larger. I think they're going to be able to get that this time around. So I'm going to take the Crimson Tide to win and cover. I'm going to go with the final score of 28-20. 28-20, Alabama Crimson Tide win. I wanted to get them over 30, but 28-20, Crimson Tide win and cover and march on to what I believe is going to be closer and closer to a conference title appearance. So that game, obviously huge for the Crimson Tide to keep moving on with their hopes. It will probably be the nail in the coffin for the Sooners, but I think there's just a tier difference with these teams. Alabama, they have some close results to South Carolina. They had to pull themselves out for that one, but they also have the big win against Georgia. They played Vandy pretty well. They had a sizable win over Tennessee. Oklahoma's been squeaking by for a lot of their results. When they've gone up against the tier 1 teams like an Ole Miss, they lose by I think 8 or 10. They beat Tennessee, but Tennessee's more of a tier 2 team. I think these two teams are just on different levels right now, and I think that will come out in way of an 8-point victory for the Crimson Tide. So those are our 2 game previews. That is our show. Thank you for trucking through if I sounded like a mumbled mess today. Thank you for dealing with sick voice. Hopefully I am feeling better by the time Monday comes around so we can get just right back on the saddle with 2 to 3 shows a week, getting closer to conference championship weekend, getting closer to the college football playoffs, national championship. We are just starting to gear up here at the SpringBlake College Football Show, and I appreciate you all being here. Enjoy the college football slate. Enjoy your weekend. I love you. I appreciate you, and I'll talk to you next week. Peace.